I'm not seeing everybody. Well, good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. I don't have
Yes.
I don't have a picture of, I see Richard's iPad and that's the only person I see.
Okay.
Richard, you're going to have to be
I'm
represented.
filling it. I'm filling it in now.
There you go. Okay. So this is how to teach sustainability merit badge. So if you were looking for blacksmithing, this is the wrong place. I'm George Denise, and I have been, this is me, and I have been teaching sustainability merit badge since it first came out. I had a small part in developing the merit badge. Um, Actually have my name somewhere in the merit badge pamphlet, which I'm very proud of. I certainly wasn't one of the primary contributors, but I was a contributor. And this is me. I would suggest that you consider taking down my name and email address and phone number in case you need to get hold of me later. Also, I have developed, which you'll be seeing part of, a fairly elaborate slide presentation that goes with my counseling the merit badge course. And if you are interested in that, let me know, send me an email, and I will get that to you, a copy of it to you so that you can use it yourself if you're so inclined. Um, let's see. This is kind of who I am in a nutshell. My scouting experience, I was actually before I was a Cub Master, I was a Cub Scout, a Boy Scout, an Explorer as a youth, and then as an adult, a Cub Master, Scout Master, Venture Crew Advisor, also Explorer Advisor. I was former district training chairman for Pioneer District, former council property chairman, former council commissioner. I'm currently the Explorer Service Team chairman, and I'm on the council executive board. I think I've been there for about 15 years or so. Sustainability related, my favorite merit badge as a scout was Nature Merit Badge. They didn't have environmental science or sustainability yet, but I actually remember hiking the hills with my merit badge counselor and identifying different trees and so forth, and enjoyed that a lot. Starting while I was in my senior year of college, I worked my way through college. And my senior year, I took a part-time job with the Sierra Club in downtown San Francisco. Ended up working there about 7 years. Um, Probably the most valuable part of that experience. There were a lot of value. I don't mean to demean it, but the most valuable part was I met my current wife there, so that was a good deal for me. Um, I was the global account manager, managing director over operations and sustainability for Adobe Systems. I was there for about 13 years, and then I was director of operations and sustainability for Oracle for about 5 years. And as I mentioned, I had a hand in developing Sustainability Merit Badge, and then I was one of the leaders that launched it in 2013. So a little bit of background. I wouldn't describe myself as an expert, just an enthusiast. But a quick rundown, because I think it's significant. While I was managing Adobe's real estate, there are three buildings in downtown San Jose were recognized by Newsweek's annual listing of the greenest companies as number 2 in the US and number 3 globally. We had a tremendous sustainability program at Adobe and completed about 64 sustainability initiatives over 10 years. We, as you can see, reduced our electricity by 53%, our natural gas use by 37%. We achieved Energy Star scores for actually all 7 of Adobe's buildings worldwide. We achieved Energy Star scores of 100, which is basically as good as you can get. We reduced our domestic water use by about 78%, and we were diverting about 98. Officially, on the reports, it showed 100%, but we knew there was a contamination in it. So I used the term or the number 98% solid waste diversion using a combination of composting and recycling and reducing on the front end to begin with. And the really good news was it had about a 1 point, what we expended, what we spent putting that program in place, actually had about a 1.2 year payback in savings, which is an 81% annual return on investment. I was going to retire at that point, but somebody who I'd originally reported to at Adobe was at Oracle and invited me to come see if I could repeat this program at Oracle. And so I was there for about 5 years. And again, we achieved Newsweek's listing of greenest companies, number 10 in the US and number 17 globally, and got the same kinds of return on investment. You notice there at the bottom, 80% return on investment. So I am one of those people who's a strong believer that we can operate sustainably. And if we are careful about how we do it, because a very high correlation between operating sustainably and operating efficiently. So if it's done correctly, there are savings to be had, or as we sometimes like to say, there's green to be made operating green. So in teaching the merit badge, I think number one, it's important to prepare in advance. That probably applies to anything you do or just about anything you do. But I think, it goes without saying, except I thought I would say it anyway. Review the requirements in the merit badge pamphlet. You need to have the merit badge pamphlet, and each scout should have the merit badge pamphlet. There's a cost involved with that, but an awful lot of troops have libraries, lending libraries, and our troop always did. And so hopefully they can pick them up that way if that's an expense that is difficult for them. You can also find online the Sustainability Merit Badge Workbook developed by the U.S. Scouting Service Project. It's a very, very good tool for the scouts to use and for you as a merit badge counselor to use. And so I strongly urge looking that up. Again, it's called the Sustainability Merit Badge Workbook. There's actually a workbook for every merit badge online, all done by the U.S. Scouting Service Project, which actually was a project that was initiated by a scout leader in our council years ago as part of his wood badge ticket. But it's turned out to be, it's taken on a life of its own, and so a very good program. You do not need to create a slide program, but I find it very helpful. I've taught at some of the merit badge midways to a classroom with 10 or 15 or 20 or even 25 kids in it. And having a slide presentation to augment that is very helpful. Now that we're doing things online, primarily in Zoom, obviously it's even more important because the slides, other than this one, the slides we're looking at are going to be a lot more interesting than just watching my face talk. Let's see. So again, I mentioned at the outset that I'm happy to share my slides with you if you're interested. So just let me know. I'm going to go back for a second because I've heard several people join. Any of you who joined, if you want to copy down my email address, here it is for you, nspgeorge@gmail.com. So these are the slides I use that we're going to be going through. I think that's the easiest way for me to share with you how I counsel the course. I make it a point to say counsel rather than teach because I'm really not teaching. There's an element of teaching in it. But as you know, the Scout program, the Scouts are doing an awful lot of the self-actuating in terms of pursuing the merit badge. So I'm counseling, I'm mentoring, and I'm doing a little teaching also. I think, obviously at the outset, and I'm thinking in terms of doing merit badges for groups online, it's a little different whether you're teaching to an individual or a group and whether it's in person or online. But begin with introductions, introduce yourself. I think presenting your credentials, just as I did prior to the scouts introducing themselves, is a good idea. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to have a lot of experience in the field, but I think it's very helpful if you have a strong interest in any merit badge that you're going to counsel. It's helpful if it's an area that you have a strong interest in. If you're interested, you're going to be more enthusiastic, and that's going to make your interactions with the scout or scouts much more interesting for them because you're talking about something you're enthusiastic about that you have an interest in. I would also point out that YPP applies as much in online classes as it does for in-person classes. So you want to have 2 adults online when you're doing online classes, just as you want 2 adults present if you're meeting with scouts. Excuse me. And likewise, you don't want one-on-one. So keep that in mind. It's probably in many respects, I won't say it's more important than when you're meeting with scouts in person, but certainly equally as important. Again, at the start of the class, welcome everyone to Sustainability Merit Badge. Introduce yourself, present your credentials, include your contact information as I did. And then I think it's a good idea to review the goals of the class. So these are what I've put together to share with the scouts that I'm doing the presentation with, or pardon me, the counseling with. Our goal is to start the Sustainability Merit Badge today and set yourself up to complete it successfully in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Typically, I meet once every 2 weeks with the scouts. So we have 4 one-hour meetings, and they also have, those are our classroom sessions, if you will. And then there are also about 4 or more hours of work that they'll need to do independently at home. The reason I say 4 or more is because different scouts approach it differently. I have the ones who kind of go about it almost superficially, do it very quickly. They satisfy the requirements, but I often don't feel they got as much out of it as they could have if they had dived into it a little more. And then I have the scouts. I had a 10-and-a-half-year-old scout who took the merit badge with me in a group setting. It was actually when we did the initial launch here in the council. We did it in the auditorium at Adobe, and it was an all-day program involving a lot of interaction and a tour of the facilities and so forth. I had a scout there that was between 10 and a half and 11 who did something that I actually thought was graduate level work. It was so good, all typed up, many pages. I thought it was so good, I copied it and sent it to the national office to share. And then I've had the ones that are 1 or 2 or 3 sentences handwritten that I can barely read. But if they meet the basic requirements of the merit badge, then they meet the requirements. But I've had kids put 4 hours into it at home, and other kids who obviously put 10 or 15 or 20 hours. If they're enjoying it and getting that out of it, that's great as far as I'm concerned. The reason it says future, the 3rd paragraph down, future sessions can be classroom or individual sessions, is because I sometimes have started with a group, and then I've had a scout who had to miss one of the meetings, one of the regular meetings, and we ended up doing it at an individual session, finishing him up. I'm doing one of those tomorrow afternoon with the scout who had to miss one of the sessions in my last group. I like to go over at the outset the requirements, and so the next several slides that I show you will just be an outline of the requirements of the merit badge again. The reason some of this is in black and some of it is in green is because the green are the areas we're going to do or primarily do in classroom in our sessions online. The black, either they don't need to do or they need to do it at home, typically with their family. Similar to personal management and family life, there's a lot of interaction in this merit badge with the family. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. As with most merit badges, there are alternative ways of completing it. So for example, in this requirement number 2, water, they need to do A, and then they need to do either B or C. So in this case, since it's black, they'll be doing A at home with their family. They don't need to do B, and then C will be doing in the session. And so that's kind of the way I put it together all the way through. I show a number of really good videos that I found here and there over the years that relate to all of this. I'm not going to show any this evening because each one typically is anywhere from 6 or 7 minutes to 15 minutes. And we just don't have time in this 50 minutes that we're doing this introduction. So again, these are just showing them, and we'll spend, in the classroom, we'll spend time going over them a little bit more, but this is simply the requirements. And then this is just a very brief outline showing them what they need to do at home, what we'll do in the classroom, and pretty much how we'll approach the merit badge. At the beginning of each requirement, I put in a little patch like this. This is requirement 1 we're looking at. And requirement 1 says, write in your own words the meaning of sustainability. Explain how you think conservation and stewardship of our natural resources relate to sustainability. Have a family meeting and ask family members to write down what they think sustainability means. So we ask the question, what is sustainability? And I give them a few minutes to think about it, not too long. Shouldn't take too long, 3 or 4 minutes, something like that. And then we come back together. And actually, before I show them this, I'll back off from that for a second. If I'm just dealing with a couple of scouts, I'll ask them each to read their response. If I'm dealing with quite a few scouts, I might have the first 1 or 2 or 3 read their full response. But after that, I just ask others, do you have anything to add to that? Anything you think they missed? Anything you'd like to add? Once we've done all that and talked about it, and that may take 5 minutes or so, then I show them what the UN's Brundtland Commission in 1987 came up with as a definition of sustainable development. And it's development which meets the needs of current generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I think that's a pretty good example or good definition. We talked a little bit about it and what it means exactly, but essentially it says we're going to use resources at the same rate that they're being renewed so that we don't run out, so that we don't use them up, and so that they're always there for future generations to use as well. Then I like to talk about what are the issues, what's driving all of this. And I've put together just a little list of some of the key issues, I guess. Clean air, 40% of the population are at risk from premature death due to air pollution. Clean water, the EPA has identified 39,000 water bodies in the US that do not meet quality standards. Ocean pollution, wildlife habitat, agriculture, solid waste, toxic waste, health and hygiene, buildings, industry, energy management, greenhouse gases, global warming, and population growth. We could probably refine that and come up with a much more detailed list and a longer list, but I think this is a good overview of some of the key areas that we're talking about when we talk about environmental issues, when we talk about sustainability. So we talked about all of these, and again, I'll spend 5 minutes or so. Then I like to go into how we got here. Again, I've got a very good video that you don't get to see, but again, if you ask me for the slide presentation afterwards, you get to see it. But number one, we've been around for what? Modern man's been around for about 200,000 years, give or take. During most of that time, average life expectancy has been about 25 to 35 years. There are still people that grew old, but a much, much, much smaller percentage. People at every level grew old and into their 70s and even beyond. But on average, about half of the population was um, about half of the population were dying prior to age 25 to 35. About half were living beyond that. And so the median was about 25 to 35. What that resulted in is when suddenly in the last few hundred years, humans started living a lot longer, it resulted in tremendous population growth. And again, this is a graph showing population growth. And we didn't even hit our first billion until just within the last 150 years. For most of our existence, there weren't actually more than about 1 million people on Earth. And only within the last, well, really, we started growing with as we came out of the last ice age and as the first agricultural revolution took place, the population started living longer, became more stabilized in communities, and the population started growing. But if we look at a graph that shows population growth juxtaposed with the history of technology, we see back around 12,000 years ago, the first agricultural revolution, and the population started to grow. And then we see, just in the last 200 or 300 years, with industrialization and the second agricultural revolution, population really started to take off. And then if you look at where it turns again and goes almost straight up, you'll see right there is something called germ theory. And then a little ways up from that is penicillin, and in that realm is when vaccinations were developed as well. Prior to the development of germ theory, people didn't have very good hygiene. And in fact, it was considered very manly in many cultures for men to wash their hands. And even surgeons perform surgery without washing their hands. So as you can imagine, the development or understanding of germ theory and vaccinations had a huge impact on our longevity and accordingly on population growth. Then, along with industrialization, we started running into some issues. This is a photo of the London smog of 1953, when actually in over a 3-day period of time, several thousand people in London died because the air was so bad. The primary source of energy at that time was burning coal for heating and for running engines and machines. And they had an air inversion that held all this smoke and smog down into the city and had a huge, huge negative impact. That was in 1953, and it was the first of quite a few of those incidents. And we had similar incidents in many cities in the United States and other cities around the world. This is a picture. This picture was actually taken in 1953, but the Cuyahoga River in Ohio actually caught on fire 13 times between 1952 and 1969 because it was so polluted, primarily with fossil fuels, that they were heavy enough on the surface of the water that they could be ignited by something, a spark or something. And this photo was actually on the cover of Time magazine in 1969. They didn't, when it caught on fire in 1969, it was put out so quickly, nobody got a good picture of it. So Time magazine used an older picture from 1953 to show the picture on fire, but they featured this on the cover of their magazine in order to make a statement about the effects and the impact of pollution. In 1962, Rachel Carson came out with a very, very important publication, Silent Spring, which talked about environmental impacts that are correlated with widespread use of DDT and other chemicals in agriculture in the United States. And it questioned the logic of broadcasting potentially dangerous chemicals into the environment. There were a number of problems, one of which was a correlation with some of the chemicals with cancer in humans that were around it a great deal. And it also had a threat to wildlife. A lot of the chemicals were wiping out bees and butterflies and such, our major pollinators. But it had a particularly harsh problem on our larger birds, our raptors, eagles, hawks, condors, and so forth. And what was happening was DDT was causing calcium not to build up in their eggs, so that when they laid their eggs and then sat down on them to incubate them, the eggs had no strength and they were crushing them, and the young weren't able to hatch. And so the result was a tremendous drop in the number of those birds across the country. And in large part because of this book and the impact it had on our population and the hearings that followed, we put a lot of controls in place to address that. And most of those birds have made a tremendous comeback since then. But again, this was one of those many wake-up calls. We had a series of catastrophic oil spills during the 60s and 70s. We had the 1967, the super tanker, the SS Torrey Canyon, ran aground on a reef just off the coast of England, spilling 25 to 36 million gallons of oil. This was followed shortly thereafter by a blowout of an oil rig in the Santa Barbara Channel in Southern California, which is what this is a picture of. And that resulted in the spilling of an estimated 5 million gallons. In all these cases and many others during the same period of time, killing thousands and thousands of seabirds and sea mammals. Then we had the oil, what do we call them? Well, in 1973, OPEC, Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, proclaimed an oil embargo, sending the price of oil from $3 a barrel up to $12 a barrel, which raised the cost of energy and the price of all oil-related products and many other products that are only indirectly related to oil as well. Besides increasing the price of gasoline threefold, gasoline had to be rationed for a while. Gasoline can only be purchased 10 gallons at a time in many areas. Based on the last number in your license plate, even numbers came in on one day of the week, odd numbers on another day, a lot of things. But one of the things that happened was it caused tremendous inflation in the economies virtually of every country around the world. This graph shows both the nominal and the real cost in 2008 dollars for oil. And again, this impacted everything. In 1973, it was the OPEC embargo. And then in 1979, it was the Iranian Revolution. At that time, Iran provided a very large percentage of the oil to the rest of the world. And after the revolution, that dried up, and until new sources were developed, that had a tremendous impact as well. So you can see the double spike here. In the 1970s, we discovered sick building syndrome. Up through the 50s and even early 60s, most office buildings did not have central heating and air conditioning. They typically were heated with steam heat in radiators under the windows. The windows were operable. You could open the windows. And so in the winter, you close the windows down to just a crack, and these radiators have hot steam running through them, radiated heat into the room. In summer, you turned the radiators off and you opened the windows more. And that was how you heated and cooled insides of office buildings for the most part. When they developed, and they really started developing central air conditioning in the late 1800s even, but it didn't become commonplace and popular in office buildings until the late 1950s, early 1960s. And then they discovered, because of the central air, they could enclose the building, seal the windows so that you couldn't open them, and recirculate the air in the buildings, which would reduce the energy costs a great deal for the building. The problem was in recirculating too much of the air and not adding enough fresh air. One, carbon dioxide started building up in the buildings, and this made people drowsy and uncomfortable and kind of not as energetic. But the other thing that happened, because they didn't maintain the building systems, the ducting in the systems and so forth, it started creating a buildup of bacteria and other microorganisms in the ducting. They would get moisture in them and they would build up. People started getting sick in the buildings and they didn't know why, but eventually they discovered it. Legionnaire's disease was another disease that came out of that, discovered in 1976 at a Legionnaire's meeting in Philadelphia. So that's kind of a conglomerate of all of the things that were happening in the 50s and the 60s and early 70s, all of which culminated in a great concern about the environment during this period of time. In 1969, NASA released the first pictures of Earth taken from space. This was a composite photo put together, but it was the first time most of us had ever seen the Earth from space. And it was, perceived as gorgeous, often referred to as the blue marble, but also somehow sitting out there in space like this, as huge as the Earth is, it somehow looked fragile and alone in space, and because of that, it became an icon for the environmental movement. And in 1970 was the first Earth Day to celebrate the Earth and to provide teach-ins and so forth across the country to bring more attention and more awareness to the environment and what we were doing to the Earth. So I go through all of that, as I just did with you, to share the issues so that the Scouts can see what happened beforehand, how we got to where we are. It's not like anybody did anything wrong on purpose to create all these issues. It's not like people were actually behaving stupidly. Well, maybe stupid is ignorant, maybe is the right term. There's a lot of things we didn't know and we learned as we went. But as we learned, we also started trying to address it. So this is out of that same UN meeting, the Brundtland Commission eventually evolved in developing these sustainability development goals for the United Nations, for the world. At first glance, this looks like, wow, that's a lot more than just the environment. That's a lot more than just sustainability. But if you look at it and think about it, it's all interconnected. And if we don't address each of these, it's very hard for us to correct any of the others. For example, look at the first one, no poverty. Poverty drives poaching of protected wild game in Africa and Southeast Asia. And poverty drives slash and burn forest destruction by poor farmers in South America. And if you look at each of these, and so I spent some time going over this with the Scouts, asking them how they think it's connected. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, they have good answers for these things. They look at them and they think about them, and they say the things that we would think about in looking at them as well. They get it. And so this is, I think, a very good slide to show, and it shows how we're trying to address it, what we're trying to do to address it. I talk about the 3 pillars of sustainability: people, planet, and profit. And I talk about what those mean. The environment, natural systems support the life of all things: bees pollinating crops, forests filtering pollutants from the air, and wetlands purifying water and are valuable. Economics, the flow of money and growth are critical to business, which can benefit quality of life. Green jobs and production efficiency are examples of economic sustainability. I think beyond that, um, we need to be prosperous in order to address these issues. The poor farmer in South America who's trying to take out a piece of forest so he can grow crops to survive doesn't necessarily have time to think about all these things. But as we become more prosperous, we become typically better educated and more knowledgeable, and we recognize the issues and we do start to address them. And then people, our family and communities are the engine of our economy and depend on the environment. Long-term health and welfare of people is intertwined with the other 2 pillars. This is a picture of an Earth and a half. And the relevance of this is at the current rate of which we are using resources on the planet, it would actually take 1.5 planets to supply the resources we need on a sustainable basis. We don't have 1.5 planets, we have 1 planet. This one takes it a step further. If everybody on the planet were using resources at the same rate that we do in America, then it would actually take 5 planets to sustain us on an ongoing basis. We don't have 5 planets, we have 1 planet, so we need to figure out how to operate more efficiently and effectively in order that everyone can live a reasonable quality of life, and at the same time that the resources of our planet are sustained for future generations. Technology has caused most of these issues that we're talking about, but at the same time, technology has a tremendously wonderful impact on everybody's lives. This shows life expectancy by region. As we said earlier, most of our 200,000 years of existence, the average life expectancy was between 25 and 35 years. And yet, over the past roughly 100 years, we've seen the life expectancy on every region on Earth, even our poorest regions, increase significantly from up to about age 50 by 1950 to about age 60 by the year 2000 to 72 today. And the goal for the United Nations is to get everybody up, the average for all regions, to about 83, which is a challenging goal, but I think a doable goal. And their goal is by the end of the century. In all honesty, I think from all of my own reading that we'll do it before then, but a good goal and a reachable goal. So we're living longer, but how about the quality of life? This graph shows by region the share of the population that's living in extreme poverty. Up to just 40, let's see. I'm checking my notes here. So today, less than 8% of the world's population live in extreme poverty. That's compared to almost 80% just 40 years ago, and over 90% 200 years ago. So again, most of the humanity throughout our history lived in something that would be described as extreme poverty. In today's dollars, that's only $1.90 per day. However, again, going from 90% living below that level to just 8% today is tremendous progress, even as low as $1.90 a day is. Moderate poverty is living on less than $3.10 per day, and that percentage has come way down as well. So we made great progress in that area, and I think that's important. But we have a long ways to go. At that point, that typically is the end of the first hour that I spend with the scouts, and I give them their sustainability homework or their homework for the merit badge, which is to have a family meeting and ask family members to write down what they think sustainability means. And we have them take notes, and then we talk about it when they come back, and then we talk about it again when we get to requirement 5. So that's the way I start. And again, an awful lot of that first 1 hour session is just looking at what the problems are, what the issues are, how we got here, and what our goals are, and where we're trying to go, where we're trying to get to. Several times as I'm presenting this, I've asked the scouts at the end of it what they think. It's a lot of data, it's a lot of information. Do they find it useful? I've always been surprised because initially I thought it was too much, and I thought I'd probably be putting half of them to sleep. What I found is that wasn't the case. There was a lot of interest. One scout said, it was a lot of information, but it was really information. It was really good, and I think it was all good, and we needed to see all of it or hear all of it. So that's kind of step 1. In requirement 2, the issues that we really talk about are water, food, agriculture, community, energy, and stuff. Those are 5 areas within that merit badge, within that requirement of the merit badge that we address. For reasons unknown to me, air, oceans, and solid waste weren't included, but I think they're important enough that I put in a little short section on each of those anyway. It's not a requirement. I can't, when we're presenting a merit badge, we're not supposed to change the requirements. So it's just additional information. There's no test on it. They don't have to do anything with regard to it, but I do touch on it. And I begin with another look at poor old London in 1952 on the left, and Leon Yonggang in 2013 on the right. So developing industry and power plants to serve a growing population and maintain a growing quality of life, in many ways is having the opposite effect, right? Technology is supposed to improve, but as nations emerge and go through the same industrial revolution that we in United States and Western Europe went through, they're running into some of the exact same issues all over again. One of the differences, I think, is that they get through them much faster now because they have our past experience to grow on, and they have modern technology to develop. So while not too long ago, China was developing more coal plants than the whole rest of the world combined, they're also developing more photovoltaic cells, than the whole rest of the world, not combined in that case. I think UoS is number 2 in that regard. But nonetheless, they're getting through that quickly. Ideally, we'll reach a point where emerging nations can skip the whole coal burning process entirely and go directly to modern technology, cleaner technology. This is a good comparison. I think it's important to see. These are the worst countries worldwide for air pollution deaths. And it's measured annual deaths from particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10, which are 2 of the major air pollutants. Deaths caused by that per 100,000 inhabitants. So Ukraine, Bulgaria, Belarus, Russia, Armenia, etc. Some of the nations that are realizing the most deaths from that. And this is a comparison. I think it's important to share the positive side of things with the negative as we're dealing with scouts. There's a lot of negative to sustainability because there's, we're in a difficult situation, but by the same token, There's a lot of positive that's been developed, being developed, and that's been achieved. Comparing China's worst cities in terms of air pollution with the United States' worst cities, huge, huge, huge difference. So you can see how far we have been able to come, because our cities used to look a lot like China's in terms of air pollution. So we've come a long ways. They'll get there. The World Health Organization guideline down at the bottom is 10 on the scale. And so anything over 10 micrograms per cubic meter is considered hazardous to your health. So our worst cities are listed here, and they are hazardous to our health. But by the same token, we've come a long ways, and these are our worst cities. Also, this is demonstrates what's happened from 1990 to 2015 with some of our major air pollutants in the US. So again, we are making progress. We've still got a long ways to go, but we've also come a long ways. And then finally, at the end of that section, talking about air, clean air, we talk about what you can do. And before I show this slide, I talked to the scouts about what things they can come up with that we can do to help provide clean air. And then this is a list. Once we talked about it, I show this list and we talk about it a little bit more. So that's typically how I take each of these categories. We only have about 4 minutes left because we need to end right at 6:50, because there's another class that's taking over this Zoom at 7. So I'm going to kind of go real quick and just show maybe one or two more in the next couple of minutes, so you can just see that pattern that I follow. So next one we're going to talk about is water. And so I just start out with a picture of the good and the bad, I suppose. Maybe the good and the ugly. But the city on the right is actually Philadelphia, which had tremendously polluted streams, rivers and streams at some point in the past, and has done a really good job of cleaning that up. There are a lot of areas like that around the country. Again, I go over the requirements for this requirement. Green, we're doing in class. C, A, and B, they need to do at home. We talk about water. Where does it come from? Where does it go? We talk about what a small percentage of the water is actually available for humans to drink and utilize for hygiene. 90% of our water is in the oceans. The 3% that's not in the oceans, 77% of that is frozen up in ice and glaciers and ice caps. 22% is groundwater, 1% is surface water. And then we talk about our public supply of fresh water, and where that comes from. This is based on 2005, and this was in the UoS. Again, of the public supply, surface water is about 11%, and groundwater about 18%. Where does most of our water go? 45% of all of our water, fresh water that we use, goes to thermoelectric power, basically cooling these giant generators, energy generators. 32% goes to irrigation for agriculture. 12% to public supply, and so forth. So a tremendous amount. If we reach the point that all of our energy is coming from clean, sustainable sources, that would free up almost half of all the fresh water that's being used for that, for those plants at this point. We take a look at the world climate and see where what areas are arid, hyper-arid, semi-arid, semi-humid, and humid. And then we take a look at a map to see where people are living. And in many cases, people are living where the water is, but it's amazing how many places people are not living where the water is. Water is actually pretty sustainable. The total amount in the hydrologic cycle is consistent. The amount of water on the surface, groundwater, atmosphere added up always stays about the same. If anything, we're slightly adding a small amount because we get a small amount of water from outer space in the form of comets and asteroids and so forth. But generally, it's consistent. But it's not where the people are, and vice versa. And that's one of the large issues with water. I think we're just about out of time. We are at 6:50. So this is a very interesting picture. I'll just reference it very quickly. Up at the top is where ground was in 1925. This is in the area of Bakersfield. As water was pumped out of the ground over the years for agriculture, the surface has gradually dropped until you can see where it is in 1977. And this is a map of Santa Clara Valley. And you can see right in the center there, for the same reason, the ground has dropped 8 feet over the years. So on that note, I'm going to stop, but I go through that same pattern. You'll notice I'm showing the improvements we've made with water pollution in this country over the years, and then what things we can do to manage water better. And I do that with each of the other categories. So I hope that was useful to everybody. It's hard to show this whole process in 50 minutes, but that's my best shot. Feel free to follow up with me, contact me, and I'm happy to share this. And on that, I think that's it for this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. It's so informative. Yeah.
Thank you all. I hope that was useful and valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Dennis, currently, are you the only one who runs this sustainability merit badge?
No, there are about 50. There are about 50 counselors in our council,
Okay.
and so I'm currently doing 2 classes. I have 15 scouts in one class, and 1 scout in another class.
And are you in the, which district are you in?
I'm in Pioneer District, but I operate at the council level.
Okay, so even scouts from Coyote Creek can
Actually,
sign
I
up.
even have scouts from Pacific Skyline and San Francisco Bay Area Council in my class.
I see. Okay. But it was so insightful, even for adults. I think it's great. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you.